Hello, I'm Riz Khan. Reaction continues to come in from the US and around the world to the news that former President Donald Trump has survived an assassination attempt by a gunman at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. A bullet fired from a rooftop outside the rally grazed Mr. Trump's ear, and he was forced to duck before Secret Service protection officers surrounded him. Well, several members of the audience at the rally were shot, and at least one man died after being hit. Armed officers immediately returned fire and killed the sniper, a 20-year-old man from a nearby town in Pennsylvania. Well, as Mr. Trump was whisked off stage, there was a striking image of him with blood on his face, managing to make a fist pump signal to the crowd. President Biden led the response, condemning the attack and expressing concern for Donald Trump, both through a private phone call and public statement. Republican lawmakers are demanding answers from the head of the Secret Service and FBI to questions of security lapses that allowed the attack to take place. To answer those questions, I've been gathering insights from security experts, prominent Republicans, and political analysts. But first, we're joined by an eyewitness to the attack, Erin Autenreith, who was a volunteer that helped to set up the rally. She was in the front row when the events unfolded right there in front of her. Ms. Erin, thank you for taking the time. I hope you're getting through and coping after what must have been quite a traumatic experience. Just take me through it step by step, what happened and what you witnessed.
Well, I was a volunteer at the rally, so I had arrived early in the morning, 7 a.m., and worked all day. And then the volunteers tend to get in the rally they're first. So I went directly to the first row, and my seat was directly in front of President Trump. I was approximately 15 to 20 feet in front of him, and there was nobody between myself and him. So pretty much I watched him, and the rally started as usual, and he put a graphic up, which was on a right screen and a left screen, and he was turning to the graphic, and we heard pops. I heard 4 pops. Sounded very much like fireworks. And since we just had July 4th, I thought, oh, somebody in the neighborhood is putting out fireworks. But then he crouched down, and the 4 Secret Service in the blue outfits jumped on the stage and pulled him down under the podium. Then the reporters that were down on the ground near him, they were all heaped together in a pile, like 5 of them. And things got quiet a little bit, and then the gentleman with the long guns and the bulletproof vest, they came on the stage and they started saying things like, right safe, left safe, and then I heard him say, get him up. So they brought President Trump up face forward to me, and I could see the red blood right here on the right cheek. And President Trump said, get my shoes. So when they pulled him to the ground, his shoes must have fallen off. And they took care of that, and then they turned him to walk down the steps, the opposite way that he had entered the stage. And that's when I could see the right ear, from the top of the ear to the bottom, streak of blood. But it wasn't gushing. And I thought to myself, oh, when they pulled him down, they must have hurt him. Or, he hit it against something. May have caused the blood. I never thought that there was a shooting. Went down the steps, got in the vehicle, and left. But then later on, people were exiting, and I saw a gentleman with blood down the right side of his shirt who had already been on the stage earlier with President Trump. That's the first time I realized it was a shooting. Nobody ran. Nobody was in panic. Everybody who was in that first row with President Trump was only concerned about his safety. But what I wanted to say is when they lifted him up, I looked at his face and I thought, oh, he's okay, because his face wasn't distorted or ashen or anything. And there was no blood on his shirt and nothing. I could see nothing on his sleeves of his, blue suit, but just that little bit on the ear and the cheek. But by the time they moved him over to the steps and they show that picture of him that's widely used now, a lot more blood must have come out of the ear.
So was your first sense of something going wrong when you heard the noise, or was it when you actually saw people kind of ducking down?
I would say it was the ducking down, because the noise did sound so much like a firecracker. people later on in the audience said it was because the gun had a suppressor on it. So it did. I mean, I don't, I'm not experienced on hearing gunshots, like probably most people aren't. But I did not think it was a gun. I thought it was a firecracker because it's a rural area with farms and yards, and I'm sure people that were living near the event were having parties in their backyards so they could hear the speakers and hear Trump, but didn't have to come in the rally.
And
That was what I thought.
And how did this compare with other rallies that you've attended and volunteered at?
Um,
I mean, in terms of size,
it was a lot. It was a smaller one. I mean, I don't want to crash anybody, but I didn't think it was as well planned as the other ones because I was a volunteer there all morning and I never got a placard. They kept on saying they were working on them and they were going to give us, something to wear around your neck, lanyard. And also, we didn't have any for the press either. They had their own press stuff, but normally we have, because I like to save them of all the rallies that I've worked at. That stuff never showed up. So that, in my mind, I was thinking this was not as well planned.
What about security, Ms. Aaron? How did the security seem to you compared with the other ones?
It seemed the same because we still went through the metal detector. Our bodies were, that kind of thing. And I had a small purse around my neck and, they opened up every zipper. So everybody inside it was wanded and checked their bag. So, but, now it's coming out that it was not anybody in there. It was somebody right outside the gate. But I mean, afterward, just talking to people. I mean, some people had pictures of the shooter dead on the ground on their cell phones.
And I think, Ms. Aaron, what surprised a lot of people was President Trump's reaction himself, pumping his fist, and I think he was shouting, "Fight."
Yes.
What went through your head when you saw that? How did that affect your opinion of him?
Well, I think it really helped all of us. When he got up with that fist up, fight, we knew he was okay. If something had happened to him, it was a slight injury. That's what we all felt. But I think it gave the crowd who they were only there for him, only to see President Trump. It just gave them more inspiration. And I mean, people have asked me would I ever go to a rally again? I definitely would.
We see.
And I didn't feel unsafe.
I was going to ask you. I'm sorry. The country, the United States, is so divided right now. And this election is quite unusual in the way people have divided down lines. And I wonder how this might, in your opinion, affect Donald Trump's popularity among those perhaps swing voters.
Well, the word in the crowd was, "This just elected President Trump."
So there was
that event.
Definitely a very popular move on his part to react that way.
There was a unity and just that we're tired of, what they've done to him. First they try to put him in court. They try to put him in jail. And now obviously somebody is trying to really eliminate him. And I think it was just, that's what I heard from everyone. Now, of course, I'm a Trump supporter, so my mind wasn't changed. But just the fact that, I mean, what he puts himself out there in front of people. I mean, like everyone said, I mean, these are families that came and normal, everyday, regular people. And he just puts himself out there to let them see him and who he is and what he says. And, he's not behind some screen. He's not in a basement. He's not hiding somewhere. And he always says, when he put the screenshot up, he said, "Do you mind if I go off the teleprompter?" And everybody cheered. And he says, "I just want to talk about something else." I mean, he just connects as a real person.
I wonder, the aftermath of what happened when those shootings happened. You were there right at the front. What was your sense of the way other people reacted? And what was the mood immediately after the president was cleared from the scene?
I told my husband it was amazing because, you see stuff on TV. That's my only experience with a shooting. And you see people running and screaming. And I saw none of that. None of that. And later I saw, the people that were injured were in the left-hand side riser, but I didn't see any paramedics. I didn't hear an ambulance. And I've seen that the neighboring people around them, the people that were hurt and shot, they actually carried them down to the ambulance, the people in the stands. So, people would, if somebody was shot, you would think they would run away from it immediately. But it was like a family, like I'm not going to desert this person on a bleacher by themselves because they're bleeding. We're going to carry them down ourselves so they can get immediate attention. That's what it seemed like what was happening. I didn't see that. I only saw it later on videos. But the people that were around me walked out very peacefully. There was no pushing. There was no shoving. There was no screaming. I mean, we were all in shock of what had happened. I think that was the number one thing.
What did you?
Just in shock.
What did you learn about those who were hit? There were reports of one person being killed among the public there, and a couple of people, at least a couple of people, critically injured.
Yes, I mean, I heard that one gentleman really got shot in the head, and the person next to them said there was blood, and they kind of knew immediately that he was probably deceased. Pictures of the other ones, I don't know how injured they were, but evidently blood was on the people around them, but it was because they were helping them down. I don't know. They're not saying anything about the ages of people. I mean, I heard from someone that somebody had a heart attack, but I never heard, this was just the talk on the way out and just people talking to each other, trying to make sense of it all, maybe sharing
Will you be
what had happened. And
will you be attending the Republican convention in Milwaukee?
no, I'm not a representative.
Okay.
I'm a local representative for my Republican committee, but I will not be in Milwaukee, no.
You will be attending future rallies, though, if President Trump has them and you're able to attend.
Yes, and I will be volunteering.
Erin,
But I think probably things will change a little bit with the security. That's just what I think. There'll be a change because it was a very open area that, it was a farm show, a lot of trees,
right,
some industrial buildings, with lower roofs, nothing, no high rises or anything like that. This farm show location is a place that I go to every year with my husband to see the cows being milked, and then they make milkshakes in the next building. I mean, that's the kind of place it was, where you go to have that kind of experience. So it was the farthest thing from anybody's mind,
Well, Erin Autenreid, thank you so much. We're glad you're safe. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Next up is Greg Swenson, the chairman of Republicans Overseas. He'll be attending the Republican National Convention this week in Milwaukee, where Republicans will officially approve Donald Trump as their presidential candidate and learn the identity of his running mate for vice president. Greg had just flown into Chicago from London when the attack happened. So thanks for your time. How did you learn about that assassination attempt, and what was your immediate reaction when you heard about it?
Yeah, Riz, I learned about it when I landed at O'Hare International Airport here in Chicago yesterday. I flew in from London to go up to the convention in Milwaukee this week. So right around when I landed is when it happened. So my phone, as soon as I turned it on the tarmac, my phone just started lighting up. My wife gave me a call. So like everybody, I was quite shocked, but I was really worried because I didn't, unless you were in front of a television, you didn't really know what was going on. So maybe 10 minutes later, I found out that, he had been injured, but not critically, and obviously was not assassinated. So still, quite shocked, a bit relieved after hearing that he escaped it. But, and I think today there's going to be a lot of, I don't think this goes away. This is not a one-time event that, people forget about in 3 days. I think this is a historical moment.
And in fact, that's what I was going to ask you as chairman of Republicans Overseas. I'm wondering, what are the most pressing questions you have at this time?
Well, I think the first one is what happened. How did the Secret Service fall down and not notice that this gunman was climbing up this, the building and getting onto the rooftop. I mean, I haven't seen footage of it, but it's, I think there definitely seems like there were some kinks in the armor with the Secret Service. That's not to suggest that they didn't show their outright bravery and professionalism when it happened. The people that were directly protecting the president did exactly what they're trained to do, and so did the brave people that took out the gunman quickly. And so, I do think there were probably some mistakes made, but it's too early to try to speculate. I think, we have to give that time. But the second thing is, the next question is, will this encourage the real radical progressive left to dial it down a bit? It's one thing to be critical, and I'm totally fine with that. Let's have the argument. If you don't agree with his policies, or some of his decisions, that's fine to criticize. But, calling him a dictator, calling him this great threat to democracy. There was a Twitter that went out a few weeks ago from Biden that said, dictator on day one, he must be stopped. Well, that's not suggesting that Joe Biden caused this, but I think that rhetoric can really trigger people who are already psychologically unstable or mentally unstable, to do something like that. So I just hope it dials down, and on both sides, Riz. I mean, I'm not claiming that the fringe right isn't just as off the wall as the fringe left, but I would hope that the rhetoric coming from the leaders, forget about the fringy parts of the party, they're never going to go away. I'm talking about leadership and some of the rhetoric from political leaders on the left that's just been really hateful.
You're right. So, of course, at a time when the country is so divided as well in the lead up to the election. Now, I wonder, how do you think this particular event will frame the next few days at the Republican convention in Milwaukee, where Republicans are due to officially approve Donald Trump as their presidential candidate?
Yeah. Well, I mean, two things, Riz. First of all, he will be welcomed, heroically on Thursday. I think it's elevated him. It's, the way he demonstrated his strength, his ability to keep cool, his reassurance of the crowd or to the crowd. And I think the crowd, reacted to that really well and in a very positive way, not in a violent or, sort of fight back way. He refused to stay in the hospital. He was there for an hour. I just think it's a moment where he's really demonstrated strength. And that's in contrast to President Biden, who, like it or not, has demonstrated, kind of a cognitive challenges as well as physical weakness. So that was an interesting angle, and I think we'll see that on Thursday. And the second thing is, it probably puts a lot more attention on the convention. I'm heading up there in a few hours. This thing really wasn't getting paid attention to by the media because so much of the attention's been going to President Biden, his debate debacle with Trump, his ABC interview, his missteps at the G7, basically the conversation around his cognitive abilities. So in one way, it might help get the attention away from Biden's problems, but also it will give an opportunity for the GOP to get some attention and get some focus on the convention, which was sort of flying under the radar. And not only because of Biden capturing so much media attention with his challenges, but also I think the Democrat convention is the one that everyone has their eyes on, because people are speculating that it will be a convention where they actually broker a new candidate. And secondly, here in Chicago, we can assume there's going to be massive protests and start to look maybe like 1968. Whereas the Republican convention is kind of boring. I know there'll be protests, but I don't think they'll be nearly as incredible and as massive as they will be in Chicago. And secondly, Milwaukee's kind of a sleepy town, as you know. So I think the focus was more on the DNC, not the RNC, right. But this incident yesterday will change that.
Now, of course, the campaigning gets a lot more heated as we get closer to the election, and the campaign ads get a lot stronger as well. And there were reports that both Republicans and Democrats were pulling campaign ads from TV following the attack on Donald Trump. So I'm wondering what your take on that is and what impact that might have.
Yeah, I think it's quite natural. You surely don't want to be doing any negative advertising and, being too critical of your opponent at a time like this. And I think, the comments from the left, from the leadership on the left, whether it was President Biden, former presidents Obama, Clinton, everybody, sort of put aside their partisan differences and sent and said really nice things. That's important. So, that how long that will stay dialed down, I don't know. But surely for a few days they'll maybe pull back. I'm sure they're going to pull a lot of the ads they were planning on running, especially in the swing states that were a little bit aggressive with the rhetoric. Again, calling him a dictator and the end of democracy and comparing him to Hitler. And I think that's going away. And if we get back to the issues and the decision making of these two presidents, Trump wins on the merit. And I think the iconic photo from yesterday with the 3 Secret Service men around him with blood on his face and a great American flag behind it, that is a winner. I would just run that all the time.
In spite of the rivalry, and I know you mentioned your concerns with President Biden, but how do you regard President Biden's public response to the news and the fact he did call Donald Trump directly after the incident?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, good for him. And I commended him for that. First of all, he referred to him as Donald, and that's a rarity. Maybe it's never happened. He always calls him by his last name. Rarely refers to him as President Trump. He just, but I thought his comments were welcome, but also the fact that, I don't know if this made the global media, Riz, but he actually left his beach house in Delaware and returned to Washington to the White House. I thought that was a class move. I thought, given the instability that can come from these things, a near miss like that, I think it was important for him to be back in Washington. And he loves his beach house. He loves going to Camp David, but especially the Delaware beach house. And so, good for him for going back to Washington and sort of, showing some leadership there.
I guess it's a wake-up call for anyone in leadership roles or campaigning like that too. Now, the shooter was a young man from Pennsylvania who was reportedly registered as a Republican. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't necessarily buy that. I mean, a lot of people, he's young, maybe he changed his mind and became a radicalized leftist, but I think more likely he might have registered as a Republican because you can vote in the Republican primaries if you're, and so if you're a rabid anti-Trumper, and we saw this in many states in the nomination process where either voters are allowed to cross over in some states, and others, they just register in the party if they're not allowed to cross over. So a lot of people have been doing that were rabid anti-Trump people. So that doesn't surprise me at all. But he did donate to a PAC, a super PAC called Think Blue or Work Blue, something like that. I mean, definitely a progressive activist organization. But again, it's day one. I think it's too early to speculate on motivations. Given that he was 20 or 21 years old, it was probably a lone wolf situation. I don't imagine that, this was some organization backed by Soros or whatever, whatever the speculators are saying right now. So I think we have to be patient and just wait and see what happens.
Well, as you know, Mr. Swenson, Americans have unfortunately witnessed several attacks on the lives of presidential candidates, including Kennedy and Ronald Reagan in 1981. And at that time, Ronald Reagan was polling badly, but he received a major boost following the attack. Now, I'm wondering, you've mentioned that this really has put Donald Trump in a kind of very positive light among his supporters because of that kind of bravado and that picture. But I wonder what it'll do for his numbers in the coming days and weeks.
I think it will help. I'm not suggesting it'll be 20 points. President Trump does have a limit. He's been capped at 47. I think this might be an opportunity for him to go over 47 for the first time in terms of approval ratings. Just because there'll be some sympathy for him. I think people appreciate the way he behaved after he was shot. So and you're right, Riz. Reagan had a really big bump because of the assassination. He gave it all back in 6 months. By 1982, he was polling in the 30s because it took 2 years for his economic policies to really work and trickle into the system. And so, 2 years after that, he won one of the greatest landslides in American history, winning all but one state in 1984. So, but he did get that bump. I think Trump will get a bump. The betting odds went up significantly yesterday, went up 18 points, I'm told, immediately after the shooting. So I think, he'll get a big bump in the near term. He'll give some of that back, but I think he was going to win anyway. Prior to the rally yesterday, prior to the shooting, he was up 5 points in Pennsylvania. That's a bigger gap that he's ever enjoyed. He was always polling behind Biden in 2020 in those swing states. He polled behind Mrs. Clinton in Pennsylvania back in 2016. So I think he's on the way anyway, but this incident yesterday will help. The question is how much?
Well, it's interesting, you referred to that image of Donald Trump with his bloodied face and his fist defiantly clenched. It seems to be one of the iconic images of the age, and I'm expecting we're going to see that on T-shirts and in campaign ads and shared on social media.
Yeah.
It's one of those images, I guess, that goes across the world. How do you think the global audience will regard the way that President Trump has handled himself?
Well, I think their first impulse will be, isn't it a shame that there was an assassination attempt, and it just doesn't, look good for the image of America, nor did it in 1981 or 1968 or 63. But you have a lot of these problems around the world. There are two British MPs have died in the last few years at the hands of sort of extremist violence, and so I think the global audience, the global media will understand that this is endemic of what's going on in the world, and I hope it ends soon. And if this is what it takes to dial down the sort of hateful rhetoric, the Trump derangement syndrome or derangement syndrome about anybody, should be dialed down.
Do you fear that politics could become more violent? We speak to analysts who worry that is the case. Or do you think this could actually be a watershed that allows both sides to step back and kind of check their political passions?
Yeah, no, I think it's the latter. I mean, look, I'm nervous about Chicago. I mentioned that earlier in the segment here. I'm nervous about political violence in Chicago. We saw it on the university campuses over the last few months. And these organizations, these places backed by Soros, the Rockefeller brothers, the Ford Foundation, they are proposing violence. They are saying they have handbooks on agitation, and they want to be arrested. They want to get into conflict with the police. So, I'm worried about that. This city is going to be under some stress. And by the way, we're in a city that has embraced so-called bail reform and defund the police. You have a radically progressive mayor who will be much more prone to defend the rioters like they did in 2020 when they defended Antifa and Black Lives Matter, who were vandalizing and killing and tearing down monuments in this beautiful city. So I hope that doesn't happen again in August, but I'm afraid it will. But this event might help dial down the rhetoric. I don't know that it will eliminate political violence, but hopefully it's the start of a better conversation.
I should point out we don't have the other side to kind of address the allegations and claims you make about their views and attitudes. But I would say that history is often shaped by chance, changing fortunes, and a series of near misses. So when you think about how different the outcome of the assassination attempt could have been, the difference between just a few millimeters with Donald Trump turning his head a fraction of a second later, perhaps, how important do you think a milestone this will become?
It's amazing. Look, I'm so glad it wasn't successful, this assassination attempt, because I think that there would have been some absolutely radical behavior from many people on the right. I'm not suggesting that the left has a lock on misbehavior. I think they do more of it. I think that they did a lot more damage in the summer of 2020 than we've seen from anything on the right, in spite of January 6th. So, I can make that argument credibly just using data and using numbers, but I'm glad that it didn't turn out to be an excuse for any radical behavior. And look at how those people handled themselves in that rally yesterday. Again, he wanted to reassure them. There was no panic. There was no, yelling. And of course, there was the initial, that first moment where your natural instinct is to duck. But you saw people helping the victims, the other victims. You saw people helping the Secret Service by pointing out the shooter, the gunman on the roof. As he was going up there. So look, I think this could end up being a good moment for the country, not just for President Trump.
Well, Greg Swenson, it was a real pleasure to speak with you. We'll be keeping an eye on things, of course. Yeah, let's talk again. Thank you, sir. So how did this happen? What security measures are taken before a former president holds an open-air campaign rally? There are reports that Donald Trump's security had been bolstered in recent weeks, so had there been any warnings of an increased threat to his life? To help me answer some of those questions, I'm joined from Parkland, Florida by former FBI Special Agent Michael Tapman. Mr. Tadman, thank you very much for joining me, sir. I mean, I guess I should start by asking, what are the main security failures here?
Well, we always go with initial reporting and what we do know, and there's plenty that we don't know. And just keeping in mind that the Secret Service is a highly trained, highly skilled agency at dignitary protection. But clearly we have to wonder, how does someone get so close to that inner perimeter, though maybe just outside of it, but so close that they're able to fire off rounds in rapid succession and actually were able to strike the former president. So the question would be, why was there an opening there, and why was he not detected as the shooter was moving into that position?
Interestingly enough, there are reports, widely reported statements about witnesses to or at least one witness to the shooter getting up on the roof and agents being informed of that. So what went on there?
And that's what an after-action report is going to have to determine. Certainly, once they get through the investigation, the immediate investigation, which is making sure there's no further conspiracy, nobody else responsible, that may carry on sort of part two of this. They're going to look at their internal actions, review it, and say, how is that possible? Where did the communications break down? Why didn't the Secret Service observe it? And if somebody called in, why wasn't action taken on it to neutralize the shooter before he had a chance to fire off these rounds?
And of course, sir, I imagine there's a lot of preparation that goes in to these rallies in terms of security. How come a line of sight to the president was left open, especially from a rooftop?
Okay, well, we can't control every aspect, the physical aspect of the surrounding buildings and area. We have this all the time. President makes speeches in D.C., and there's a lot of high roofs and windows that are always going to be present in any kind of urban or even semi-urban environment. So we can't clear every building and make sure every rooftop is clear. During the time, of course, beforehand, you do an assessment. You go and you check the buildings and you look for these spots that might be vulnerable. And if you want to put an agent up there, you get with the owner of the building and you ask him, could we plant Secret Service agents up here as counter snipers, security, to ensure it doesn't happen. But if there's a building far away and there's an open rooftop, or there's windows in the building, we can't cover every window. But that's why we have counter snipers out there to look for that, look for those threats, and be prepared. We're never going to be 100% secure in a public venue.
In your experience, so where would the investigation go from here?
Again, the investigation will go first to looking at the suspect. We will put together sort of a prosecution, even though he's dead, we won't prosecute him. We'll put together a prosecutable case with all the evidence so we know what happens from beginning to end. And we want to find out if anybody else was involved, aided and abetted in any way, if anybody else would have a criminal culpability. And again, is he part of some greater conspiracy, which might indicate that there'll be another threat, immediate threat to the former president. My guess is he's a lone wolf, but you can't presume, you have to make sure. And then the FBI and the Secret Service are going to tap their resources to see if this is going to gin up any more kind of violence. My concern is now that this has happened, you're going to have two types of people sitting on the precipice of violence. You're going to have one that's going to say, gee, I need to pick up where this guy left off. This is my calling. Or someone else will interpret this as their calling to seek revenge and, maybe shoot at President Biden or somebody else. So the escalation of violence is quite clear, clear and imminent danger. And it's going to be up to law enforcement community to maintain their intelligence level to see if we can thwart any further political violence.
So what went through your head when you heard the profile of the shooter, a young man from not too far away from the location of the rally, actually from there, 20 years old?
Honestly, we could have figured it out before the profile came out. I think when we do this research, we get all his electronic communications and cell phone data, we will probably once again see writings or ramblings of somebody who has, grievances built up and felt it was their mission to take it out. As we've seen in other shooters, workplace shooters, school shooters, they know the area, so they feel more comfortable operating in a local area as opposed to traveling somewhere. So a young man, access to a weapon, nothing really surprising to me other than the fact that it happened.
There's some dispute over claims that there was a request for increased security for Donald Trump, and that was not granted. What do you know about that?
I don't know about that. I haven't heard that, and I don't know who made that request. I can say that the Secret Service, Donald Trump was a protectee simply by being a former president. And now, of course, he's a protectee as being a presidential candidate. Again, the Secret Service is very adept at what they do. They train for this. We've had an attempt in recent history, so it's not like we're totally, oblivious to this threat. So I'd like to hear the facts of that before we, sort of accuse the Secret Service of not responding to what they felt was a request for additional security.
Understood, sir. Now, of course, the country is known to be very divided at this stage with a very unique election coming up. I wonder how this incident is going to impact the security plans for the upcoming Republican Party convention in Milwaukee.
Well, I think in the short term, it's going to sort of up the game for both the Republicans and the Democrats for the reasons I just explained. So we'll have a heightened security alert, maybe probably expand that outer perimeter you hear us talk about, make it more secure so someone can't even reach the inner perimeter from the outside. Maybe, again, more scrutiny of rooftops and windows as we discussed, trying to engage the public more in cooperating, giving the Secret Service access to key points. But we're not going to stop our presidents and our presidential appointees or candidates, rather, to go out there and press the flesh and campaign. That's just the nature of the business. They're going to do it, and it may be heightened security for about 4 or 5 months. But just as if we've seen in other violent matters like 9/11, all the heightened security afterwards. But over time, we tend to return back to normal, which is what we want to do. We don't want to feel victimized by these threats. So I think a presidential candidate and a current president, while campaigning, are going to want to show American resolve that we won't be intimidated by one act of violence, and we will continue on as we always do. So there'll be heightened security, but I don't think you're going to see the candidates, hiding behind the Secret Service. They're going to be out there campaigning as they always did.
Now, of course, the conventions, having been to party conventions myself, they're quite contained environments, very large but contained. I wonder, when it comes to smaller events such as this, whether the security services might advise the presidential candidates, both of them perhaps, to think twice about these kind of settings.
Well, you don't get close to the president in these things without being scanned. When I was with the FBI, I had an opportunity to meet the sitting vice president. I can tell you the Secret Service relieved me of my weapon. They took no chances, even with an FBI agent. So they're pretty cautious when you get close. So if it's small, there'll be that much more security. Everyone will be screened. It'll be easier for the Secret Service agents to keep an eye out for everybody looking for suspicious behavior. The larger the venue, the more crowded it is. Obviously, the harder it is to do that. But they're going to keep that inner perimeter very secure. It's the outer perimeter you have to worry about. That still falls within their sort of zone of responsibility, and now they're going to have to review what they did that allowed this to happen.
And of course, Mr. Tabman, what chance is there really to control the environment if someone is willing to risk their own life in order to commit a crime like this?
Well, it's an interesting comment you said. When I was in the police department, I trained as a hostage negotiator. This is back in the 80s. We always said that negotiation was saving their lives. Then over the years, that transformed as to how do you negotiate with someone who's not interested in saving their lives? There is no foolproof way to protect anybody. All we could do is minimize the risk, try to deter it by the quick actions of the Secret Service in killing this individual. But again, if someone's going in there with a death wish and no plan of coming out, it's going to be very hard to deter and very hard to stop.
Michael Tabman, thank you very much for your perspective, sir. So where does this leave the political landscape in America after the attack? No one's talking about Joe Biden's age today. The only image resonating around the world is that of a bloodied former president presenting a heroically defiant stance just moments after surviving an assassination attempt by mere millimeters. Instant online polls showed a huge spike in favor of Donald Trump. TV shows heard Republican voices describing him as heroic, and one previously unaligned voter vowing to crawl over broken glass if necessary to vote for him. Well, I'm joined now by Scott Lucas, Professor of US and International Politics at the Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Professor, thanks for your time. What was your first reaction to the news of that assassination attempt?
Well, I was working with a British outlet when the attack happened, and the immediate reaction is just sort of being stunned and being very uncertain what exactly had happened. We went through a phase, probably about 30 minutes, where we knew that Donald Trump had been hit by something, but we didn't know whether or not it was actually a bullet. We didn't know, in fact, whether the sounds of popping were firecrackers or gunshots. So you go through that phase of what's happening, and then the phase also, equally important, are there victims in the crowd? And it turns out we've got at least one person killed, two critically wounded. And then you're processing, just this everyday violence that does take place in America. But now, of course, it's a particular type of violence. It's political violence. And you know that it's not just simply going to be a significant event in terms of what has happened, but there are going to be ramifications of it. And I can tell you what struck me immediately and what I think is going to be with me for the months through this election and beyond is that Donald Trump, as he got back up after having hit the ground when his ear was grazed by that bullet, as Secret Service officers were trying to bundle him off the stage, shouted at them, "Wait, wait, wait." And then he put his arm up in the air, that fist, that clenched fist, and he shouted at his supporters, "Fight, fight, fight." Now, the iconic image that your viewers probably will see today, which was taken by Evan Bucci of the Associated Press, is of Trump surrounded by those Secret Service officers with that fist raised in front of an American flag against a blue sky. That's going to be part of the story. That's going to be the story that the Trumpists are going to want to tell. But for me, the equally iconic moment is that message to his supporters to fight, fight, fight. The same message he put out on January 6, 2021, outside the White House before they marched on the Capitol. Because as important as it is to realize that Donald Trump could have been a victim of political violence yesterday, Trump has made his career on the politics of violence. And my concern today, not just as an analyst, but as someone, this is my country. This is where I was born and raised. My worry is that this incident will be used to feed that politics of violence so that Trump can return to the White House that he tried to hold on to, remember, in what effectively was a coup attempt, 3.5 years ago.
So I'll get on to some of those issues you've raised there. I'm wondering, though, you say that iconic image will stay with you. How do you think it will affect the voters in the US seeing this kind of fist-pumping bravado, I guess, at a time of crisis?
Everybody's speculating today on what it immediately means for the election in November, just as we were speculating last week. What does it mean if Joe Biden remains the Democratic candidate? A question which is still with us as well. And I can't tell you how this is going to end up in November, because there are some people who are with Trump come hell or high water. There are some who are deeply opposed to him. And then you've got those important voters who are in between, who haven't made their mind up yet, the independent voters, the so-called swing voters. And so everyone who goes out today and says this will inevitably lead to a Trump victory, or this may not lead to a Trump victory, that all gets put to the side. My concern here is how does this cycle of political violence, not just a cycle, it's almost like wave upon wave of political violence in terms of actions and in terms of rhetoric, affect the American people? How does it affect the American system? Because beyond Trump, we have an issue here that one of the two candidates in this campaign is someone who said on day one, if I return to the White House in January 2025, I will act like a dictator. I will wreak retribution on my enemies. And it is the case that whatever happens in this election, Donald Trump may use this event yesterday as the rationale for carrying out that retribution and for acting, as he put it, not me, as a dictator.
Having said that, Professor, one thing that did happen after this incident was that both political parties, Republicans and Democrats, pulled their campaign ads. So I'm guessing that was something of a kind of middle ground, a calming effect.
I think it's important to note that Democrats and many Republicans, and indeed many leaders around the world, came out with statements that wished Donald Trump well. Importantly, they said that their thoughts were with the victims of this shooting and their families. But there were some Trumpists who immediately took on that invocation of Trump saying, fight, fight, fight. So Donald Trump Jr., within minutes of the shooting and finding out that his father was okay, was immediately saying, this is all the fault of the radical left. J.D. Vance, who's a potential vice presidential choice for Donald Trump, said this is all the fault of the Biden administration. Steve Scalise, who is a victim of gun violence, he was seriously wounded in 2017. He's a U.S. representative. He came out and blamed the Democratic Party and the radical left. So there was immediately this attempt to capitalize on the event by whipping up division, not by trying to make that call for reflection and unity that most Democrats and Republicans had uttered quite rightly, whether it was President Obama, whether it was other Republican leaders in the Senate and the House. Those words will be overshadowed by those Trumpists today who will go for confrontation.
Now, Professor, a lot of there are lots of threats against the president of the USA and any rivals, any politicians, much of them filtered by the system, if you like. And we haven't really seen anything on this scale for quite a while when it comes to targeting of a US leader. So what do you think in this case precipitated this particular incident?
Well, I think it's important to note that even though we have not had an assassination attempt against a US president since 1981, when Ronald Reagan was wounded by John Hinckley, we have seen political violence in recent years against senior US legislators. I mentioned Steve Scalise, the Republican representative who was wounded in 2017. In 2011, the Democratic Senator Gabriela Giffords of Arizona was critically wounded. 6 people were killed by a shooter outside a grocery store in Tucson. In 2020, there was a kidnapping plot, possibly one which could have led to injury or death of the Michigan governor, Gretchen Whitmer. And of course, there was the political violence of the Capitol attack on January 6, 2021, which is when Trump supporters went through our seat of the US government and were looking for people, legislators, to attack and possibly kill. They shouted, "Hang Mike Pence," Trump's vice president, as they went through the halls. So we have had this political violence with us. We do have this ongoing problem of a proliferation of guns. We do have this polarizing, often corrosive social media, but we do also have the catalyst of certain politicians who feed upon this division rather than dialogue, this confrontation rather than engagement. It is my devout hope that all candidates in this election, national, state, local level, take a step back and call for consideration of the issues, including, by the way, gun control, and avoid hostile rhetoric.
You know, it sounds, Professor,
it's my worry
I was going to
that
say,
some of those candidates will not.
It sounds, Professor, like you're predicting a kind of increase in the level of threat, the risk of more events such as this happening, that perhaps the divisions in the country are driving a more violent society in this respect, and people may, feel emboldened to take action.
It's already happened. Again, if I could refer your viewers to an incident that took place in late 2023. An intruder broke into the house of the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, one of the leading Democrats in Washington, looking to maim or to kill her. He was wielding a hammer. Nancy Pelosi was not there. Her husband, however, Paul Pelosi, was. His skull was fractured. Now, both Pelosi's are fine. I actually saw them at an event in Ireland just a couple of months ago. But there was a politician who immediately after that attack on the Pelosi's did not call out the political violence, did not say this was wrong, did not call for reflection. This was a politician who mocked the Pelosi's and said, "How's Nancy's husband doing? It's a shame she had a wall around her house, but it didn't work." I suspect you know who that politician was. It was Donald Trump. The political violence is already with us. It happened to manifest itself yesterday in an attack on Trump himself for motives that we do not know yet of that 20-year-old shooter.
Just
Thomas Crooks.
Yeah, I was going to say, just wrapping this up with a thought, this puts a lot more pressure on the security services. A lot of people are saying that there was a security failure, intelligence failure even, at this particular event. But I wonder how things will develop going forward when it comes to how security can be implemented, the monitoring of chatter and so on that goes on in order to try to avoid these kind of incidents.
There's clearly a security breach, a serious security breach. Yesterday, that shooter was on a reportedly on the rooftop of a building just outside the perimeter that was set up around the rally. So while that perimeter could scan people with magnetometers to make sure that there were no guns inside of it, just outside of it, he was seen bear crawling into position by multiple people who tried to alert security services. Something went badly wrong, and that'll be a part of the investigation by the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the Secret Service today. But beyond this, you can put up as much protection as you want to around presidential candidates, senatorial candidates, House candidates, as long as you have the poisonous rhetoric that whips up people, that feeds their anger, that feeds their frustrations, that feeds their resentments. There is always the risk that whatever your security is, one of them will get through. I think there is a responsibility now of everyone in the US, activists, politicians, and maybe especially the US media, to act responsibly now. Stop amplifying the divisive rhetoric. Stop headlining the tweets. Focus on the issues. Focus on the question of responsibility and competence regarding those issues. Make this a true campaign in which you are trying to get people to engage with the problems that affect them on a day-to-day basis, rather than becoming part of the spectacle and the circus that may not entertain, or if it does entertain, may do so violently.
Professor Scott Lucas, thank you very much for your analysis. I hope we have a chance to chat again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, stay with Al Arabiya English as we continue to cover this story. For now, I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thank you for watching.